There is an argument in writing that a story is only as great as its idea. That the better the idea, the better the story is going to be, and that the success of a story hinges on the potency of the idea. And I think that's completely wrong. Because an idea alone isn't what makes a story great. It's how the writer uses the idea and extrapolates logical conclusions. And there's no better show that does this than Severance. Severance takes a simple concept of splitting a body into two minds and uses it as the foundation on which to build a massively complex story, world, and even philosophies. So today, I'm going to explore all the different ways that Severance uses its defining idea to pull depth from the show's writing. Today, we're going to discover how to write a great story. There is a writing technique coined by Ernest Hemingway known as the Iceberg writing theory, in which a writer shows the audience surface-level ideas, but gives very little context for the audience, allowing depth and meaning to come through implicitly. And Severance not only does this in spades, but they weaponize it into the story itself by teasing the audience with questions and mysteries. For example, in the first episode, we see Mark get injured. And then as he's leaving, he's told about the injury, but is lied to about how he sustained the injury. And thus it creates a question in the mind of the audience. Why? Why lie to the outie about something that's happened to their innie? And further, if they're willing to lie about something as small as a personal injury, what else are they lying about? And when are the characters going to find out? This kind of mystery creates something known as dramatic irony, which is when the audience knows something that the character doesn't. When this happens, it creates tension, because we now have the answer to something the character is looking for, and what drives us crazy is a new question. Will the characters discover the truth in time? And then over the course of the story, we get to watch as the characters inch closer and closer to the truth or the answer, one that we, the audience, already knows. And this keeps us hooked, sitting on the edge of our seats, a carrot dangling in front of our face to keep us watching, long enough for them to answer, but then provide new questions, new carrots to keep us coming back and keep watching. And it's great. It's a great tool for writers to use to create situations where the audience is given questions they want the answer to, and then, over the course of the show, slowly becomes revealed. There is a limit, however, because it's easy to create questions. It's easy to keep people guessing, to keep putting in more and more twists and delaying the ultimate answer. But the longer you put off the answer, the bigger the expectations becomes. And the last thing you want to do is build up the expectations of the answer to be so much that the audience couldn't possibly be satisfied. So be wary. Create questions, but don't forget to answer them. Create a string of questions and answers to keep the audience engaged. Don't just create a bunch of super questions that get bigger and bigger and bigger. Put focus on one super question that you know is going to be mind-blowing for the audience. Now, in novels, there is a concept known as the world-building learning curve. This is a theory that is essentially about how difficult or easy it is for your audience to understand your world. For example, a vampire story has a low learning curve because vampires are a well-understood fantasy monster. We are familiar with the rules that guide them and their strengths and weaknesses. Whereas a second world fantasy like Game of Thrones has a higher learning curve with new monsters and magic and cultures that take time for us to learn about and understand, therefore a higher learning curve. Now, one of the best ways to get around that learning curve is to write what is known as a portal fantasy story. This is a story trope where you have a character who is in our normal world that we understand, and then they get whisked away to a strange world with strange rules, and we get to learn with that character about the rules of this new world. It's a well-established tool that allows the writer an easily justifiable way to feed your audience exposition without it feeling forced, and therefore useful in lowering the learning curve of your world. So what does this have to do with Severance? Severance is a cleverly disguised portal fantasy. We have a character, Helly, who is whisked away into this strange new world, and as the new trainee, we get to learn with her about this new world while still having the anchor in our own reality. We suddenly get to learn about Lumen in the religious way they speak about Kier and his guidebook. We get to learn about the history of Lumen through the artwork found throughout the severed floor in the Hall of Kier. They use this perspective shift to ground the story in a world we understand, and then slowly feed us information about a world that is completely different. And the more we learn, the more we think we understand, and then the deeper the show goes, constantly challenging our understanding and leading us deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. It's a clever way to write a strange science fiction world while still keeping it grounded in a world that we understand. to keep your audience hooked and feed them more and more complex ideas without alienating them or overwhelming them. Now, one of my favorite parts about Severance is the different philosophical and moral questions we as the audience are asked to ponder. In fact, the first line of the show is exactly that, a philosophical inquiry.
Who are you?
What makes you you? Are you inherently yourself, or are you the product of your memories? Are you defined by nature, by genes, or by nurture, by your experiences? Who are you?
It's okay.
And as the show goes on, the questions become more and more complex. What is a person? What defines a relationship? What defines cheating? If one part of you consents to working, but the other part does not, which do you listen to? Where does the moral boundary lie? Severance uses their concept of splitting a personality into two to explore these questions and subjects in ways that suddenly become almost taboo, and then dials up the complexity of these moral paradoxes and philosophical dilemmas. But it never does it from a place of judgment. The way the show asks these questions is by putting these characters in complex situations, which then forces us to look at the way these characters behave and ask ourselves, how would I act if I was in their position? What would I do? And so, there you have it. Severance takes a simple concept of splitting a body into two minds and uses it as the foundation on which to build a massively complex story, world, and even philosophies. So, final takeaways. Use your idea to create mysteries that your audience wants the answers to, and therefore will keep them hooked to keep watching and in order to find. Then, use these mysteries to elevate the stakes and drive tension that the audience will desire catharsis and resolution to. Finally, by using dramatic irony, answer these mysteries for the audience, but keep the characters in the dark to drive up the tension even more to see whether or not the characters will discover the answer before it's too late. But, writer beware, don't wait too long to answer the question, or else it could be unsatisfying. Next, use dual worlds or a portal fantasy device to lower the learning curve of your world. Use a character with little knowledge of the world to give a justifiable reason to feed your audience exposition and information, and then use these dual worlds to keep your audience grounded while slowly increasing the complexity of your fantasy or science fiction world without overwhelming your audience. Lastly, use your magic or science to make changes to the world and add complications and complexities to taboo moral and philosophical questions. Present these questions to your audience without giving a clear answer and let the audience decide for themselves whether or not these things are right or wrong. But lastly, the most important thing a writer can take away from Severance is that the idea is not everything. It's how you layer, combine, and use it. Because after all, the idea of split personality is a well-established trope within fiction. One of the oldest examples that I can think of being The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, a story written in 1886. A story written 100 plus years ago about two personalities sharing one body. Ideas are not new, but how you use them can make them feel new, and how you allow the creative decisions you make to impact your world can make them feel new. Fantasy and science fiction often walk hand in hand together. The only difference between these two being that in fantasy, the driving conceptual or fictional idea revolves around magic, and in science fiction, the fiction idea revolves around science. But whether it's magic or science, it's important to allow your idea to ripple out and create logical conclusions from the impact of its presence. If people are severed, and we want the innies to be good worker who worship their job, we must therefore create a religion around work. These extrapolations allow for the audience to feel that there is depth and thought in and around the world that is creating impact, and are able to come up with their own logical conclusions. World building, at the end of the day, is about taking a small change and imagining what huge implications will have on the world. And Severance has created an intriguing story with complexity and depth that we'll all be thinking about long after we've left the office. If you enjoyed or found any of this helpful, please subscribe to help grow the channel. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.